All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Judy Villacruz Brandt. I am one of the FACES officers here at AT&T. And today we're actually in for a really good treat. We're going to be doing our cultural series today. And again, it's going to be kind of our sequence or our follow-up, if you will, to our Boss Lady interview that we had last year. This one we're titling as Boss Lady or Boss Lady. And this time we're actually interviewing a woman by the name of Dalena BenaVente, and hopefully I'm saying that right. Is that correct,
Perfect.
Dalena?
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, so in this session, we're actually going to record it. So if you wish to not be a part of it, you can go ahead and drop now. You should have seen a message when you first entered onto this meeting, but for the most part, like we were mentioning, just so we could share this with you at a later time. It'll be posted on our YouTube channel, as well as our up-and-coming FACES National website, as well as our Southern California website. So a few housekeeping rules. If you can, just please go ahead and mute yourselves out. We don't want to mute out everybody because of the panel that we're going to be having on this call, but just as a courtesy to them and also to each other, if you could kind of make sure that you don't have any outside distractions as we're all kind of sheltering in place, as you can see with my background. And so with that, let me just go ahead and tell you a little bit about Dalena, if I can. So she is a food writer and a cookbook author of Asian Girl in a Southern World. This is not your mother's cookbook. I actually had the pleasure, Dalena, of reading it recently. It's such a good book. It was easy to read and the flow of it all. She currently lives in Orange County, California. She was born in Tennessee in pretty much a predominantly Confederate flag-waving town, right? And so we're going to talk about the various types of issues that she's gone through and just kind of how she's kind of overcome adversity and also in that time, prejudice. So we'll definitely have some good Q&As after the ending of this call, should we not address any of those questions during the interview themselves. So with that, before I go any further, I'd actually like to introduce my co-moderator, who is Lila Pavo. If you can, just go ahead and say a little bit about Alyssa Moore, who is actually going to be doing the interview for Dalena. So, Lila?
Thanks, Judy, and good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing an alumni to the Boss Ladies interview, Alyssa Moore. You all may remember Alyssa when we interviewed her last year with AVP Ellen Valencia. Alyssa has since moved to a different department and is joining us from Arizona today. She is now the VP GM of the Desert Southwest market, and despite her hectic schedule and numerous responsibilities, Alyssa makes time and is involved with all things FACES. So who better to conduct this interview than the original Boss Lady herself? Prior to her move to a VP GM, Alyssa was the AVP in the West region at the In-Home Solutions Department and was former president of FACES SoCal. She is passionate about diversity and inclusion and is actively engaged with various employee groups at AT&T. Alyssa is married to her husband, Latavian, and they have 2 dogs, Coco and Frenchie. Alyssa, I'll hand it off to you to start our interview.
Thanks, Layla. And, you know, Dalena, I'm so excited to be here with you today. You know, for just a little fun fact for those on the call, Dalena and I met maybe about a year ago now through a mutual friend. And I remember this person calling me and saying, oh my gosh, I just met this amazing Filipina American woman. I think you two will hit it off. You have so much in common. You need to talk to her. And after a few phone calls, I just knew that she was an amazing person. You know, there was so much to learn from her and about her. I just knew that there would be some additional value-added opportunities to have her speak to our FACES members. And so I'm really excited to have you here today. And, you know, we thought it would be important to celebrate you, Dalena, not only because of how great you are, but also because we're on the heels of Philippine Independence Day, and thought it would be relevant to include you in a discussion about the various things going on in the United States today. So with the call for Stand for Equality, which is something that AT&T stands behind 100%, your story is relevant with the way you grew up in the South. And so, you know, as I was thinking about what we could talk about today and the different things that you've incorporated into your amazing book, you know, I wanted to just kind of kick it off by asking you, you know, what was your motivation around just kind of sharing your life story and experiences and putting it into a unique biography / cookbook with some really great recipes?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you that was so sweet of you to say all of that, all of those kind things. That's so, so sweet of you. And I am so honored to be here and to be a part of this as well. So I've been looking forward to this since, you know, we first started talking about it back when. So the reason I wrote the book is I think it was just out of what I called it was just a need. So all my life people have been asking me that question, and probably a lot of you have gotten the same question, like, well, what are you? Have you ever heard that before? Like, okay, so what are you? What are you? You know? And so growing up in the South, my family was the only Filipino family in the county. And eventually, as we became more well known, we would make contacts with other families in the area. And I think we were able to round up 6 other Filipino families in the Tri-County area, 3 counties. There was only 6 Filipino families. So the whole time I was growing up in the South, which was predominantly Caucasian, Confederate flag flying, the other race that was there was African American, Black, a lot of heavy racism. But what I saw as a Filipina growing up was the white people
Looks
had
like you got a fancy
them,
headset on this call.
and
Yanks me out.
I'll just go ahead and go on. So I just didn't have the same group as everybody else had. You know, like I just didn't have that same social support group that a lot of people had. And so I grew up being asked the question, what are you? Then I moved out to California and I thought, oh, finally, I'm going to know what it's going to be like. You know, I'm going to blend in with everybody. I'm just going to look like everybody else because in Southern California, there are a lot of tan people with brown hair, not like where I grew up in Northwest Tennessee. But what I didn't realize is when I got out here, people would hear me talk and go, okay, where are you from? Like, so I would still get the questions. So I never found that spot where I really, really fit in, where I'm never going to walk into a room and there's going to be a room full of Filipinos with Southern accents. It's never going to happen. Like, that's never, ever going to happen. And so I knew I had a story to tell because people didn't know exactly what I was. And then when I thought about that concept, we all go through that in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And I thought, well, if I tell my story and I tell it through food, which Anthony Bourdain called the great equalizer, because people quite often who have differences can break bread together, they start having a discussion, then they're able to, there's peace, you know, even if you agree to disagree. So I just thought I needed to put the food in there and I needed to tell the story as well. It was something people wanted to hear about.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And as I was reading through the book, it all makes sense, right? And I think as Filipino Americans, we've all kind of been in that situation of, you know, who are you? What is Filipino American? I've never heard of that before. And so going through that explanation and trying to find different ways to connect and fit in is quite the task sometimes. And so, you know, when I think about what you have shared in your book, Asian Girl in a Southern World, it paints a picture of the South where it almost had time stood still, right? And this is regarding the lack of exposure to Filipino Americans or, you know, those other than Black or white. In your opinion, has the area you grew up in stayed the same or has it evolved?
That's such a great question because it has done both on extreme levels. And I find that myself very intriguing. So, for example, the Asian population there now is so much more than it was before when I was growing up. A lot of people adopt, a lot of people move into the area. It's just more than what it used to be. And so you're starting to see in the high schools, you know, little social groups form so that the kids who are all Asian or Polynesian can kind of get together, or they're just more well accepted to try out for the cheerleading squad or whatever it may be that wasn't always there before. On the other hand, just recently in the past couple of weeks, one of the biggest businesses that was a very big employer in the area was just reported to their corporate office, Honda, for some racial comments that had been made on his Facebook page, and they're going through a very big ordeal with that right now. And my county that I'm from, like I said, like when I was introduced, I don't live there now. It's quite a shock because it was such an accepted thing. They never imagined that there was any way someone from, way up a corporate ladder would take interest in what their Facebook said and would come and, say, hey, you can't represent our brand anymore because of that. So, it employed over 100 people, and in a small town, that's a lot of people, so there's a lot of that that's still going on. So it's really shifting. It's growing in a way, and it's also experiencing the pains of moving into this new world we're going into where that's just not tolerated anymore.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that everywhere, right? Like we want to see the advancement, and we're seeing some people being held to a standard where they are being accountable for their actions, and
Yeah,
it's helping with the movement that is happening
absolutely.
right now. And
Yeah,
so I think it shows promise for what our future can hold, which is really great.
I do too.
Yeah. And so, to dig into the book a little more, I love the humor you put into the various hurdles
Hmm.
that you went through. And I don't want to, ruin it for anyone, but I was just thinking about your uncle with his shotgun, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
just trying to, make notice of himself. And
Yes.
but I also appreciated the story about the thief's pecan pie, and the recipe looks great. But do you want to share a little bit about that story with the audience that's here?
Oh, sure. I was I think it was third grade, and I went to a very, very small school. I mean, it was really made up of it, in my elementary school was made up of two buildings that were actually built and constructed by, people who built buildings. But the rest of it was they were trailers. They were just trailers that had been shifted into classroom settings. And there were these huge pecan trees, and there would be time to harvest the pecans, and the pecans would fall on the ground, and I would think, well, they're just going to go to waste. Like, there's no way the squirrels can eat this many. I mean, they were gigantic trees. Like, they're going to go to waste. Like, why would we do that? But there was a rule we weren't supposed to be taking the pecans home. Well, you know, I didn't really agree with that. And so my 8-year-old self challenged that rule a little bit and came home with a lot of pecans for my mother. And she made these beautiful pies. And I felt so indulged, and I felt so proud of myself. Like I had contributed to my household, like, oh, I'm like doing the older Filipino sister thing. Like I'm contributing to my household, you know? And so I brought the pecans home. My mom made 2 pies. I got full off of the pie. All of our family got full off the pie. And then my mother made me give the other pie to my teacher. So the next day I had to go to school carrying a pecan pie for my teacher who knew I had taken the pecans. And so I just thought it was such an interesting way for my mother to teach me a lesson without humiliating me and without, making me feel really bad, because she saw my intention, but she also was trying to cover for me at school at the same time, because now we had blessed the teacher that could get me in trouble with the pie from the pecans. So like, how bad trouble could I get in, But my mom knew where those pecans came from. So she handled it very wisely, very, very wisely.
I feel like all of us could probably tell a story about how our Filipina mom helped us kind of navigate through learning a valuable lesson, right? They're really great at doing that.
Yeah.
When I think about the flow of your book, it's so unique. It goes from story to poem and then a recipe.
Hmm.
It's perfection. right? So was cooking and writing always something you've done as a child?
The writing, absolutely. So I remember when I was about, maybe not even in kindergarten, it could have been before kindergarten, but do you remember those little cheap diaries that had that really cheap lock on the side where you could pick it with a bobby pin and it just opened it? Like the lock was irrelevant. It was just there for show, you know? But I remember the moment I saw that is when I became a writer. I thought, whatever happens with a book with a lock on it, that's my life. Like, I don't know what is inside of that, but that's who that's going to be a part of me. Like, as soon as I saw one of those things, I knew that was part of my personality. And so I started writing when I was really, really young, ridiculous stories, like pitiful, you're just like a little kid, you're trying to be so artsy, you're trying to come up with like artsy things, you're getting all emo in your room. That term doesn't even exist yet, but because you have a creative personality, you're leaning into like songs on the radio and really feeling it and like trying to write something. So I was really, really into writing from the time I was very, very young. The cooking came later when I moved from Tennessee to California, and I couldn't just drive to my mom's house and get what I wanted. And because I grew up in the South, I wanted both. I wanted Filipino food and Southern food at the same time on the same table. And there's not a restaurant that does that. You can't, there's not a Southern Filipino restaurant anywhere that I've been able to find. And I don't even expect to find it. But I wanted cornbread and adobo and fried rice all at the same time. And so the only way I could get that was either get a plane ticket and go back home to Tennessee, have my mom fly out, or learn how to cook. And I knew I would want it much more than I would be able to fly out there or her be able to fly back out here. So I had to learn how to cook. And then that was a conversation starter as, my social circles developed. And then you have potlucks and you bring things and people are, why did you bring this? Like, what is this? Who brings, fried chicken and, whatever weird fermented fish thing I'm bringing with the green beans, like they go, what is this? And so that would always like lead into a conversation. So the food had to be a
Yeah.
part of it too.
Yeah, and I was listening to you as you were talking about your diary with the little locket, and I remember my Hello Kitty and Little Twin Stars diaries growing up, right? So that was one of my favorite things. And to your point, I don't know that there was anything worth reading in there, but I felt like it was valuable at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the food combos, it's definitely something you want. And so it's also a great way to bond with our moms and our family, right? Because food is how we express ourselves and we share, and it's a form of giving, which is what we love to do. When I think about all of the meals that I've seen you kind of post on social media, they look delicious. Who were your cooking heroes, and how did you tie their influence into establishing your own Filipino flavor?
Definitely my mom she's my number one cooking influence because I didn't realize it as a child, but as an adult reflecting back on my childhood, how we do, I realized my mother was really trying to raise Filipino daughters in a place where, how in the world do you do this? She really didn't have the support. She didn't have even, how do you source ingredients for some of the Filipino dishes? So once she found out there was an Asian market in Memphis, we would drive 2.5 hours to get a 20-pound bag of rice. And that sounds ridiculous to most of us, but that's what we had to do because Walmart was our primary grocery store, and they didn't have that. There was La Choy soy sauce, but we're not. That's no. My mom's like, that's not real soy sauce. Like, we had to go get the real thing. So
Had to be Kikoman,
it had to
right?
be Kikkoman. It had to be Kikkoman. And she, her three sisters, Jasmine Rice, and she needed patis, and she needed these ingredients. And she really was a trailblazer to try to raise us on Filipino food, because she was willing to go anywhere to get what it was we needed. And she would, like, work deals with the aunties on the phone. Well, if I, sew your dresses, will you send us mangoes? Like stuff like that, And so she was always like cutting a business deal. And so I heard her negotiate, and, we'd get like the boxes, that delivered to our houses, the balikbayan boxes. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
And so the boxes would come in, and just like packages of noodles that we couldn't get because there was only spaghetti and egg noodles at the store. So my mom, I just saw there was no amount of effort that was too much for her in order to try to pass her heritage on to us in a place where it was virtually impossible. A lot of people would just give up. A lot of people would just say, well, we just don't have it here. My mom was the one that she's like, I'm not giving up. And so for me, writing the book, creating the recipes, whenever I got to the place where I wanted to stop because it was just difficult, or I was tired, or it seemed impossible, or I didn't know what that next step was to get a book published, I remembered, hold on, my mom's blood is in me, and this woman was able to find mangosteens in Northwest Tennessee. Like, if she can do that, I can hit Google one more time and figure out how to make this book. I can, I can try this recipe one more time to try to get it right. So my number one is my mom. And even in the places in the book where I'm not talking about her, she's just all in it, because her tenacity to finish something and to follow through with what she wanted, her dream for her daughters.
Yeah, and you're reminding me of something that you've shared with me before, and it was a great story about your mom as you were kind of describing your book to me, and how resilient and creative she was to make an impact in the community, right? Knowing it was not as diverse as, we would have wanted it to be back then. But after time, I think your house was kind of one of the cool houses that people actually wanted to come to, that your mom would actually cook enough food to serve, a small community. And so I thought maybe you could share a little bit of that, because you talk about breaking barriers.
Yeah.
And she did it there too.
My mom knew, she knew that if she could get her food into the hands of the right people, it would change things for me socially at school, and probably just for our household in general, because we were such a, people were kind to us, but there was a little bit of mystery there. Nobody really knew what we were, where we came from. My mother spoke beautiful English, still does, but because her accent was thicker, she would speak beautiful English, and then because the Southern accent can be really thick as well, they'd both be speaking English to each other and not understand what the other one was saying. So I was a translator for English to English. So, it's like, well, she's speaking English, and well, he's speaking English too. So I would be the mediator there. My mom knew that whenever there was a potluck or a school banquet or something like that, even if she wasn't comfortable enough to go because, whatever the reason was, I imagine there's a lot going on. If you move somewhere that you just never expected you would live ever in your life, there's a lot going on there. But my mom always wanted us to be able to participate. So she would send me to school with 200 lumpia, and so there I am, like, and then it's like mashed potatoes, macaroni and cheese, salad, jello, all of the things. And then bam, 200 lumpia. Boom. And then, you just wait for that one person in the room to get it, because that one person is going to tell everybody how good it is. And it was just like, whoosh, they were gone. They were just gone. And from that moment on, it was always, oh, can your mom bring something? Or what are you going to bring? Or can I come to your house after school? And so a few years of that, and then I was in high school, my house was known as the house where everybody could eat. My mom would just cook. She would just cook. She didn't really, spend a whole lot of time talking with us, but her place was in the kitchen, and she would cook enough for everybody and for everybody to take food home, and everybody just wanted an invite. Our phone was always ringing, always. Remember, like the phone on the wall with the cord. It was just like always ringing. People always trying to figure out, are we going to Delena's after the softball game, after the basketball game? And so by the time I was in high school, it was no longer a situation where I was experiencing a lot of racism and a lot of being an outcast. It was really like I was kind of like leading the charge in a lot of ways. Like, come to my place, we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, and everybody was invited because my house was a multicultural house. So that means everybody that was invited was also multicultural.
And everyone felt welcome. And it ties so well with, who we are as Filipino Americans, right? Like hospitality is like one of the things we are known for, we are passionate about, and it's great to hear that your mom made such a difference in your community. What new recipes are you trying out these days?
Oh gosh. I don't know about y'all. I don't know if y'all have started eating anything weird since coronavirus hit, but for me, it's almost been anything that fits in a bowl that I have the least amount of chance of spilling while I take it to the couch and sit down and eat while I watch TV. It's been more about things that go into a bowl rather than a plate. But I've been doing a lot of egg recipes. I think because I went so long without eggs, I was like, is this like the new world? Am I ever going to eat eggs again? Or eggs always going to be gone? When am I going to get eggs again? So I've just started getting eggs again. So I've been perfecting my poached egg, which was something I didn't care about before because whatever, I just make it over easy, throw it on top of whatever. But now I have the time to work on a poached egg. And so Eggs Benedict is something I've been working on. A homemade hollandaise is something that I haven't really, really cared about doing. If there's a hollandaise in my mind, I could just make gravy because I'm Southern. So, but I've been doing a lot of egg dishes. That's really about it. And I've fallen in love with hot sauce all over again. I've always loved hot sauce, but I do wonder if people are eating like differently since all of this has happened because I'm eating things I've never eaten before and I'm falling in love with things that I've never fallen in love with before too. And I have like 6 hot sauces in my refrigerator right now.
Oh my, that is quite the selection. I don't know that I'm eating anything different, but I feel like I'm eating a little more than I should. So I'm trying to, work through that a little bit.
That too.
Dalena, when I think about everything that's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, are there any triggers for you with your own injustices or prejudice that you've seen? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
There are because I've watched a couple of things that are out there, and in my book, I talk about how I grew up. I was called the N-word. I was called the N-word more than some of my Black friends, and these are candid conversations that I've had with my Black friends, and because you kind of figure out who are in the community that will talk to you that way because they develop a reputation. And so you compare notes, as an adult because you just feel like you need to go back and heal through some things together. And so we would compare notes and they would say, you were called that more than I was. And of course I had no idea because I didn't, it's not like you're taking stats or anything, but there were some triggers there. I think the trigger for me is I'll tell just a really quick story to just talk about minorities and people who are disenfranchised and forgotten about. I was telling my friend the other day I applied for a minority scholarship in college, and I knew I was a shoo-in, right? Because my grades are good, extracurricular activities are on point, and I was denied the scholarship because I wasn't Black, even though it was a minority scholarship, and I was the only half Filipina, half white person who had applied. And so I had gone to the administration and I said, I think you overlooked me because there's only one of me and this is a minority scholarship. So I think I have a really good chance at getting this. And they said, no, it's not for you. And so the triggers that come up for me are me going back to experiences like that. And it's not about Black versus Filipino or white, but it's just that feeling of being crushed, that feeling of being, you don't matter. It's that feeling of you're irrelevant right here because there's a system in place that doesn't serve you. And I know you think it's supposed to, but you're wrong. and it's because of conversations that have taken place that you're not a part of. So that has come up. And with that said, I also think it's important for me as a Filipina in this time to not focus on the injustices against me as a Filipina, but to take that and use it as a way to support my Black brothers and sisters who are going through so much more right now. And so when I stand for them, it's not because I'm saying, oh, I went through it too, and it's not fair for me either. It's because I have felt what they have felt in some small degree. And even if they don't agree with me, they don't even have to, but in my heart and in my mind, I know what it's like to feel left out. I know what it's like to be discriminated against. I know what it's like to feel irrelevant, to feel like you're doing everything you can to keep your head above water and somebody just keeps pushing it back down because you don't fit the description that they find acceptable for success or whatever it is that they're looking for. I have felt that before. And so even if my history and heritage isn't the same as theirs, I can use that to support them.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I think, these types of conversations that are happening now and the level of support that is being done where everyone is taking a stand for equality, for the Black Lives Matter movement, it just is so impactful when you see it happening. And we are in a time of change, and it's having the dialogue and taking a stand and taking action is what's going to continue to move this forward. So thank you for sharing that. What one message would you like to get out there with our audience regarding race and prejudice? I know you touched on that a little bit with your last example, but is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think two things keep coming up for me as I'm living through this time just like you are. Two things. One, be kind. We never know what that other person is going through and what they've lived through. Be kind. Even if you don't agree with them, be kind. I think that our society has lost empathy and compassion, and we forget when we see somebody doing something that we wouldn't do, we forget that none of us got to pick our parents. None of us got to pick where we were born. None of us got to pick our educational system that we were born into or our teachers. And we were raised by our environment. And if we had been born to the same people they had been born to in the same environment, we could be them. So we really are all each other. So I would say, number one, be kind. And then the second one I would say is have courage. When you see something is wrong, have the courage to stand up. Because if we just are complacent, it's not going to change. And I think a lot of what people would consider the violence that is happening right now, they're overcompensating for those of us who don't have the courage to stand up just a little bit. They're overcompensating so that the amount of action that is taking still equates to all of us doing the right thing. I think if we all did the right thing on our individual basis, some of the more aggressive things that are happening right now, there wouldn't be a need for it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And, you think about it, and to your point, everyone has their own individual story. Mm-hmm. And so be kind, take a moment and just get to know the person that you're sitting next to, or, just your environment, right? Don't be judgmental. Take a moment and understand. And, right now, being silent, we know that that's not okay. That's not going to help press forward everything that is trying to be accomplished and changed at this time. So thank you so much for sharing that feedback. And I know we've got just folks that are ready to ask some questions, and we wanted to leave a lot of time for that. So, Layla, I'll turn it back over to you.
Give you a nod or a thumbs up at the very least. Okay, good. So I apologize really quickly, but I just wanted to reiterate, I read your book too, and it was such an easy read. And just to reiterate, just the grace that you've been able to acquire after everything that you've gone through. If you guys were to hear or to read the book and then also see this interview, you'll see what I'm saying is that this lady was called the N-word when she was 5 years old, and how you endured just sitting in that bus ride. Honestly, I got choked up reading that, and how they didn't really understand who you were. And when nurses came when you were born, just to kind of see what exactly is a Filipina, you know, it's like, oh, who is this baby? To just kind of go through experiences like that. I'm pretty sure a lot of us on this call, myself included, I actually grew up in Doylestown in Pennsylvania. So it was a lot of Amish folks over there. Same kind of experiences that you've had, Dalena, that they just kind of looked at you like, what are you? But I love hearing the stories of like how you were able to get over this type of adversity simply through your love of cooking, how your mom was kind of like this instrument or this beacon that just kind of made people come together through the Filipino hospitality, through our cooking, all that great stuff. And so that being said, I wanted to go ahead and open it up for anybody else who wanted to share perhaps maybe some of the things that they're going through, or if you have any questions for Dalena, or even the boss lady with respect to anything that has to do with standing for equality, or perhaps even just asking Dalena about her history. So I'll go ahead now and unmute everybody, but again, there was a lot of background noise, so I really apologize for the folks who can't hear me and who don't know that there's a lot of noise. We want to be respectful to the folks that are on this call. So let me go ahead and unmute it and ask for any questions.
Like, obviously it's not. So, yeah.
People being so ignorant when, again, people have problems with what's happening when people aren't being careful.
It's Vanessa.
I know. And it doesn't help when you have the, like the Cheeto, like you said, that says, oh, it's all gone. The plague is gone. Or they call it the...
When he said slow down the test, and you're like,
I am.
Leave it.
Okay, there you go. How's that? Is it gone?
Yeah.
It's gone.
She's going to be
Thank
so
you.
popular because we're posting this on YouTube.
And is the restaurant open? All right, thank you very much.
Okay, and it's also, Athena. Can you mute Athena?
Athena. All right. And Jan, I know you had a question, so go ahead and ask the question while I'm looking it up. Yes, while I'm looking for Athena.
I'm all, pick me. Hi, Dalena. My name is Jan Jarkey, and I'm like Judy's other half, so I'm just so excited. She has not stopped talking about you, and just hearing your story, just from the beginning, you like had me hooked, which I thought was very interesting. I'm like, why did you move to the South first? But my other question, because my dad was in the military, so I was born in Rhode Island, and then we moved to Florida. So just hearing your story, because it's the South, and hearing your story and like remembering, I mean, I'm starting to choke up. Remembering, I mean, quite literally, like we were the only Filipino family in all of Navy housing, and at the school, and there were 5 of us, so there were 5 Filipino little brown kids running around, and I didn't think about it, you know. I moved there when I was 4. I didn't think about it, and I didn't understand why everyone looked at us differently. They're like, exactly like you were saying, what are you? What are you? And I remember that, you know, that little nursery rhyme, the very racist nursery rhyme, like Chinese, Japanese, you know, and they're like, what are you? And I just was like, well, hearing your story, that like brought it all back, because I wasn't white. There was you were either white or you were black at that school. So I think, and then, you know, in the South, we say orange, we say all these different dialect things, but I heard your voice and I'm like, oh my gosh, her voice is so cute. Like, it's so different to see a Filipino person with a Texas accent. So my first question was, which I don't know, I didn't have a chance to read your book, but why did your family decide to move to Texas or to the South when there isn't a big support group for Filipinos there?
So my dad is from Tennessee. So it was Northwest Tennessee. My dad was born and raised in Tennessee, and then he joined the Air Force, and he met my mom on his travels, and they fell in love, and then they moved back to Tennessee where his roots were. And I was born there. So I was just born in the South, Northwest Tennessee, Obion County.
Okay, and then my second question, was it for work? What made you move to Southern California?
It was for work because the town I was in was so, I mean, just really so small. There's not even 1,000 people there. There's not even a stoplight. There's no fast food restaurant. So I had gone to college and I just felt like I could be in corporate America. I just believed I believed I could do it. I just knew I could do it. I knew I belonged there. I was just so good at, because like I had explained earlier, I would translate my mom's English to the cashier's or the pizza guy's English. And so I was already negotiating when I was really young, the Avon lady, I was already like working business deals when I was really, really little. So whenever I was out of college, I wanted to negotiate bigger deals. And so I got hired for a job in Southern California and I thought, okay, well, I'll go for 1 year. And then if it doesn't work out, I'll just go back to Tennessee. But I've been here ever since.
That is amazing. Your story is super inspiring. And I'm so happy that you're here telling us your story and sharing all that stuff you're doing.
Well, thank you. I really am so happy to be here. I really, really am.
I have another question for you, Dalena, from Lily Piccolo.
Okay.
Lily?
Hi, Dalena. Nice to meet you.
You
virtually.
Too. Yeah.
So you spoke about, how your whole life people ask, well, what are you, right? I myself have gone through that question for all of my life as well. Both of my parents are from Mexico. I'm very proud of my Mexican heritage. Many stories that you shared today just about food and culture and family connect a lot to the culture that I was brought up with. I also have a 3-year-old daughter who is Mexican, Moroccan, Italian, and English. And I can already see down the road that, she's going to be asked the same question. And my questions to you are about that need to know. In your opinion, what is your take on why people need to know, quote unquote, what we are? And has that feeling towards that question shifted for you over time?
That's such a good question. When I was younger, I took it really personally. I took it really, really personally because I thought, you internalize it and you think there must be something wrong with me. I'm so different that nobody even knows what I am. But I look at it this way now, which to me is the preferred way to look at it. I live in a house, I live on a street. If somebody drove down my street in a car that I had never seen before and I didn't know what it was, I would say, what is that? I just would want to know what it is. I wouldn't say, oh, it's a car. I would say, I've never encountered something like that. I'd like to know what it is. So I think what I try to do now as an adult is when people approach me with that question, I really, really try to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're making an effort to learn about who I am and they're making an effort to learn about me. Maybe they're not phrasing it quite right because we're not taught how to properly phrase things like that, how to properly approach people. So what is the proper way? But when people have asked me, what are you? Most of the time, it has been with good intent. They just want to know. They just want to know what it is, just like a car that you've never seen before. What is the make and model of that car? It's so cool. What is that? I've never seen that before. What is that? So I try to take it like that instead of taking it as something negative because it happens so often. If I internalized it as something negative, it would have a really bad effect on me.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Just the change. I felt the same way when I was younger of, well, why are you asking me that? I'm obviously Mexican, because I know I'm Mexican.
Right, because you're Mexican. Yeah.
Right. Because, maybe some of the characteristics aren't as obvious, if you will, again, quote unquote, to some people. But yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Some people just are curious, really curious to what it is. And then some people are a little malicious about it. But
I just know that's a conversation that, you know, I'm going to have with my daughter. And thank you so much for your insight for that.
Of course. And I can tell you the fact that you're even here and you even asked that question, you're going to handle it so well. Like there's no perfect answer, you know, except you're doing your best. That's the perfect answer. And whatever the question is in that moment, it could be a different answer than if your daughter asks you that question tomorrow, because it could come with a completely different set of circumstances. So
exactly.
I already know you're going to handle it great.
Thank you. So one of the comparisons that I'll make, I'll say, you know, when you see like a brand new shiny bag that somebody's carrying and you want to know what is that, right? It's like that. You're that shiny object.
Yes. Yeah, that is what it is. People just want to know. They want to know. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Did anybody else have a question for Dalena? I can't really see the chat room, so go ahead and just shout it out if you do.
Hi, Dalena. This is Melissa. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Hi, Melissa.
Hi there. I'm in the Chicago area, and I was born and raised in Chicago, but my parents are both from the Philippines, World War II survivors, and where my mom was an Army brat, and so they were stationed after World War II. They were brought to Arkansas. So hearing your story, thank you so much for sharing your story, because it reminded me a lot of that side of the family and how unique they are, that they are a group of Filipinos in the South, but they have, you know, these deep Arkansas accents. And I just remember the stories my aunt would tell of all of a sudden, you know, being on a boat coming from the Philippines, and then the next day or however long it took them, you're in Arkansas, right? So she's actually working on her story and coming to the U.S., and just listening to her talk about the process has brought up memories, both good and bad, that their family is actually processing. And so I was just wondering, in your process of writing your book, was there anything that you came to terms with that was like a finding or something that you maybe unsurfaced, feelings that you didn't have, or that, you know, you talked through with your family? Because I just thought it was interesting that not everybody in her family, although they went through it together, not everybody felt the same way about those experiences they had. So I guess I was just wondering, if in your process, did anything come to light that you thought was either interesting or a new finding, or just something that you had to work through with your family as well?
That's such a good question. And I know exactly what I need to say about it. There was something that came up about that, because I have a younger sister who is 18 months younger than me, and her experience was very different than mine. And so when I wrote the book and we were all talking about it, the question was, why was her experience so different? And then it was because I went first. I went to school first, and so they knew she was coming. And then I went to junior high first. They knew she was coming. And then I went to high school first, and they knew she was coming. And then we went to the same college, and so they knew she was coming. So I made a way for her, and she didn't have to experience as much as I did, because I was the first one. So I was the one that was doing the explaining. I was the one doing the teaching. And then she came after, and sometimes I had friends lined up for her, because I had already like interviewed my friends. Do you have younger brothers and sisters? Because my sister is going to be coming up. And we found out that they did. Sometimes I would like hand deliver friends to her to make it easy, because I so desperately didn't want her to have to go through what I went through. And 18 months is not a very big age gap at all. But with that 18-month span, her experience was very different than mine. So that was a really great question you just asked.
Thank you for sharing that. And with my mom being the oldest of 12, I can understand what you're saying and kind of paving that way for your siblings. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any other additional questions? Maybe we could take maybe one or two more.
Hey, Dalena, this is Angie Verzosa. You've heard the phrase, when in Rome. And people would think that just because you've moved to a new country or a new place, that you kind of stay with what the norm is for that specific area. And it is really a struggle for many that I've seen, where you want to bring your true individual self to that specific region. So I am touched and would like to find out, you know, the tactics that your mom had done to kind of help be a part of the community, yet be her true self. I mean, I think that resonates a lot with me because she did a great job. I mean, hearing that story, and it just made a difference, I think, to just open up, you know, being a part of a community that she's not familiar with, but at the same time, bringing them into the world that she belongs to, not losing herself as a Filipina. Wow, I would love to meet your mom.
Yeah. Well, maybe y'all will one day. You know, just really quick before I answer your question, I will say since Black Lives Matters has come to light in the past few weeks, past month, what I decided to do as my form of action because I felt like I needed to do something, but protesting in the streets was not something that I'm able to do. I have kids that I can't leave. I did start a Facebook group called A Racially Safe Space, and it's a public group, and it's a space that I created because I still believe that there are people who, in spite of our differences, are able to have civil discussions about what's happening in our world today. And it's rooted in kindness, and it's rooted in civility. And what we say is we agree in humility, which means if a bunch of people agree, we don't all gang up and then attack somebody. And we disagree peacefully, which means if somebody disagrees with us, we don't, we don't get really aggressive about disagreeing. Manners are absolutely mandatory. And I'm thinking about having my mom for a guest. So I wanted to invite everybody to take a look at that page since you had brought that up. But to answer your question, I would say if we think about it as I want to impact my community, I want to make all of these big changes, it's so big. It sounds so big and it sounds so daunting. I would say just start where you are with what you have. And that's exactly what my mom did. My mom knew how to cook, and she had a daughter who would go talk to people. That's what she had to work with. And then she had a husband who would drive her to Memphis every weekend to go get rice if she needed to, or ingredients. Because my mom didn't drive, like my mom was the real Filipino mom that she's not driving, like, don't get hurt in the backyard. I can't get you to the hospital. Like, she doesn't drive. So she just started with what she had. She knew how to cook, and she had a daughter who could talk to people, and I could take that food places. And so anytime there was a community potluck or, a band banquet or a basketball award ceremony, I mean, where I went, we weren't going to any kind of hotel and getting catered banquets. It was always a potluck. It was always a potluck. So there was opportunity there. So I would say instead of thinking of it in terms of how do I impact my community, just take a step back, take a breath, and say, what do I have? What do I have to work with? Because what you have is enough. And however you can use that and whatever impact it ends up having, that is exactly what you're supposed to be doing. I think whenever we step beyond what our calling is, and maybe our calling is greater than what it is right now, but if we step into it too quickly when we're not ready, that's where it gets into nervousness and feeling like I don't know what to do. So just start with what you have and start there and take those opportunities. So, everybody is different, and that's what makes all of this great, is that we all have different things. That's why when you put it all together, it's good. We don't all have the same stuff. So, my mom had a daughter and she knew how to cook. Somebody else might have, completely different set of circumstances and resources, but you have something right now that is important, that is useful, that will work to provide whatever kind of influence that it is that you're wanting to have. And I would just invite you to not be so hard on yourself and just look at what you have and just use what you have right there.
Great. Thank you. That was very insightful.
All right, gang. I wanted to make sure before we ended the call to let you all know where to get Dalena's book. honestly, like I said, it's a really easy read. It's just like, it goes from her stories to poem to recipe, so super easy, or vice versa. So your book is available on Amazon Prime, right? And then you could also get it at Barnes & Noble.
Yes.
It's called Asian Girl in a Southern World, This Is Not Your Mother's Cookbook. So make sure you look it up. Give Dalena some love. Follow her on Instagram as well. I wanted to hand it back over to Lila and see if there was anything that you wanted to input, and maybe you could leave it with Miss Boss Lady. But thank you very much, Dalena.
Thank you.
Hey, Judy, thank you. It looks like there's a question from the chat real quick as we wrap this up. What's the Facebook group name that you mentioned, Dalena?
Sure. Yep, a racially safe space. So a racially safe space.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Right. It doesn't look like there's any other questions. Thank you again, Alyssa and Dalena. It was a great hour and a lot of insight. And thank you to our members for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a joy for me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is so valuable for me. I know everyone, all of our members that were able to join us today. You have shared your gift with us, and we just appreciate you letting us get to know you and all the great things that you've accomplished, and really your story. So thank you for your time and your commitment to sharing our culture as a Filipina American. So thank you for the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.